Welcome to the Chief's Garage. Well, if you're new to this channel, I appreciate you stopping in. And for those of you who have continued to take a look at what I'm doing here in my little small two-go garage, thank you guys, I appreciate it. In today's video, I think what we are going to look at is, let's take a look at suspension and what I did to get suspension done. I'll tell you guys, it was one of my nemesis. I had so many frustrations doing suspension and brakes and trying to put all of the things that roll and absorb shock. All of that took quite a bit of doing. There were a couple of days there when I wasn't sure how I would get it all back together, but you know, I was a first time, Fox body builder, even though I'd owned another Fox body before, and that 1982 GT looked like this that I'm showing you now. But in the overall scheme of it, I wanted to make the car drive and handle better than it did from Ford. So I used aftermarket parts. You're going to see those in some of my stills. I used things from Steeda for springs and also for caster camber plates. Lots of late model restoration, just restoration parts, control arms and stuff like that. But you'll see all of that as we get into the stills. I could tell you that one of my greatest challenges was I took the front springs out of the car, and took me about 3 days to get them back in. After multiple trips to the local parts store trying to find whatever I could, not knowing that at the time you couldn't put the stock springs in without a spring compressor. I went on the channel and purchased one of these devices. So if any of you, and trust me, this was the best, $25 I ever spent when it comes to putting in sports springs or lowered springs. It does not work if you're trying to do this on stock springs. What I ended up doing was purchasing this device. And I modified it a bit. So this is a regular spring compressor. You can buy it at any O'Reilly's or Advanced Auto or, AutoZone, any of those. But the problem with this was it was too long. If you put this in the springs, and of course you need to disassemble this from the spring with the spring in the car. So it needs to go through the whole of your control arm from the bottom. Well, if you did that and compressed the spring, it was too long here. So as you can see, I've modified it on the end a bit. Used some ARP bolt lube, which is, high pressure lubricant. Put that on it, was able to compress the stock springs and put them in. And I drove the car around for a while like that on stock springs, and it looked almost like a four-wheel drive, which wasn't very cool, but I did. So what I did after that was I decided that I wanted a lowered look, but I wanted a functional car. So went to Steeda, found a set of their sports springs, lowered about 1 inch in the front, about 3/4 of an inch in the back. And to put those in, like I said, much simpler, because this device that you can purchase at Late Model Restoration will let you drop the lower control arm down, swing it down, put this in the little hole in the perch, and it'll push the spring and hold it into the control arm while you swing it up and put the bolts back in the front suspension. And a piece of cake after that. So if you don't have one of these, I don't know what they cost now, but at the time they were, like I said, 25 bucks. But stick around, guys, take a look. I'll show you what I did for suspension. You're gonna see that this is in no particular order. You'll see the car in various stages of paint. Because there was different mods that I did along the way, including some changes in wheels. Later on, we'll talk about wheels a little bit more and why I chose what I chose. But for this session, guys, stick around, tune in. Glad you're here. If you have questions, drop them. It was a labor of love, guys. I was working, a full-time job, sometimes overtime, and this was my stress release. Come to the garage, break out the tools, wrench for a bit. Maybe a couple of days I didn't wrench at all, but I wanted to keep the enthusiasm up because I needed to get the car to move under its own power. And I wanted to be able to drive the car and keep the momentum going. So stick around. Tell me if there's anything that you see that you have questions about. I'll be glad to answer those, and continue to post your questions, guys. I appreciate it. I love answering your questions. I read them all. And if there's anything that I can post that would help you in your build or in your decision making, and we'll talk about that in a segment of how we go about this and things that I did now in retrospect that I would have done different had I been able to see these videos. So thanks for tuning in to the Chiefs Garage. You can also find me on Instagram at EMG_motorsports, and you'll see a lot of my content there as well. Thanks for watching. As promised, guys, some of these are the stills from doing the suspension in the Fox body. I think the wife caught me there, and she was looking in the garage to see what I was doing every afternoon. But I started with the front suspension and just started taking things apart, not knowing where this was going to go, didn't know what I was going to find. Didn't actually have all the tools at the time, even though I wrenched for years. I was borrowing a lot of tools and getting into areas where I wasn't sure what I was going to find. This is the lower control arm. You can see that the ball joint's completely gone. The owner, I don't know how long they'd been driving it this way, but when I got into it, it wandered all over the road. It was just not a fun car to drive. Here you can see, rather than try to change the ball joints, I just pulled the whole control arms out. They were like $250 at late model restoration. Everything you see in that pile basically got thrown away. The only thing that I kept was the actual original spindles, and got those all cleaned up and put back. The rack was good, didn't have any leaks in it, but the bushings were gone. So I replaced the bushings in the rack, in pinion, changed all of the rod ends, and made that all new. As like seemed every 2 weeks, I was getting a shipment of parts from uh, supply houses somewhere, one place or the other. You can see all the McPherson struts, all of the pieces there. Another shot of it, of more worn out stuff. The McPherson struts in here you could push up and down with your hand. The rotors were gone, the bearings were gone. Everything about it was shot. So I started putting it all back together. I told you earlier that it had spring problems trying to get them in. This is after, days of frustration. I finally was able to get the original stock springs back in and start building the front end back together. I took the time to redo all of the brakes, all the brake lines, all of the bushings, everything in the front is completely new. Everything except the spindles, most of and the hardware. Hardware is basically new as well. So that was the end product, along with sway and the sway bushings. This is the rear brakes. This is how it was when I got it, guys. Pull the drums off and looked like it'd been sitting in water. But we're not going to use any of that stuff. I started the same process I did with the front. Took out the lower control arms. You can see on my little work stand there that I've fashioned. You have all of the parts that I needed to do the rear brakes and start working on the suspension in the back. The lower control arms, of course, you can buy these bushings for it. But for $125 or $30 is what I paid for solid control arms, things that are much more rigid. Of course, some people box the originals, but I didn't think that was worthwhile. I took pictures of some of this just to get representation of where things went, because I've done brakes many, many times, but this is probably a picture that I took back then just so I knew how I took the brakes apart. The upper control arms in the rear suspension were rubbing, and you can see there's a bunch of rust there. The bushings are gone, nothing's centered. The axle was off kilter just a little bit in the back, but we were able to solve that by taking some time and putting all new products in the back. So by putting all the new products in the back, we were able to get everything centered again. Everything has nylon bushings in it now. All the springs isolators are all been replaced. I put the car back together, with the original axles, all new hardware on the brakes. All of that was all put together, and uh, everything painted. Kind of made it look nice as I could. I didn't change the quad shock because they were actually still good. They don't do a bunch of work, and even though they were original to the car, I didn't have any real issue with them. But I did change the shock. I even put back the original damper in the springs. Over the period of about 3 weeks to a month, I just ended up with a pile after pile of junk that was in the floor that I'd pull out this, pull out that, and by the time I was all done, basically everything had been pulled out of the suspension and thrown away. This is me doing my uh,
string method of aligning the front end just so that I could drive the car. It was not difficult to do. I mean, anyone could do that. You get it close enough. The original caster and camber is preset in this car, and I hadn't already changed the caster camber plates yet. So all I had to do was get the toe in. So just got the toe set after all the front suspension was done, so that I could drive it. And I drove it like you see it here for a while. Drove it around. Did errands with it. I had already fixed the seat, so I didn't have the gangster lean, but it was just ugly. It looked like a four-wheel drive, and I had done a little engine work. We'll talk about engine work later. I found out later that the reason that the rear wheels wobbled was because the axle, the flange wasn't straight, and so that took me to the next phase. Well, if the axle's on straight, let's pull the rear end back apart. And I did that, put in all new bearings and seals and cleaned up the differential. I didn't change anything in it. The clutches are still good. It still worked on the limited slip differential. They didn't really have any issues back there, and it all looked good. So I put it back together. Got these axles from Summit Racing. They don't disclose for where they get their axles. The word on the street is they're just Yukons that have been rebranded, but put new axles in it, and ran across someone on Facebook Marketplace that wanted to get rid of a set of 91 ponies. So I purchased them. They were kind of, faded everything. They didn't have any road rash on them. So dragged them home. Wanted to get rid of the turbines, refinished them in the garage, sprayed them all back the original color. And of course, you can buy this paint at a couple of different places. You can go to Ford's website and actually purchase this argent color, and or you can have it, mixed before you can shoot it yourself. And yeah, it's not on the jack stand, guy. That's how much, air there was about the tire with the stock springs with new isolators on it. And I thought it kind of looked kind of ugly, even though the car by this point had been painted. Um, yeah, it just didn't work for me. So I started thinking of, well, what do I want to do? Do I want to go coil over route? Do I want to do something? And I decided, no, that's just too far out. Want to keep the car as original as I can. So I went to Steeda, and after looking at a couple of different websites, decided on these the Steeda Sport Springs. And so the next journey began. You can see from this photo that the Sports Spring is actually about one coil shorter than the stock spring. And I know there are many folks who cut a coil off their stock springs. You do you. But these are progressive rate springs that lets the car ride well. And lets it handle. They actually get stiffer as you corner, and I love it. The drop on it now is perfect for what I do. It's real world. It's not so low that you can't get over things and humps, and I don't worry about the front, hitting or any of that stuff. I don't have any of those problems. Even with the tires and wheel setup that I have now, there's no rubbing in the front because it's just not so low. The 275s on the rear. With the Cobra R's that I have now, and they don't rub anywhere. Went to my local guys. There's a this shop is unique. Maybe one day we'll talk about it. But if you're in Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads area, the hot rodder himself, this guy out at Davis Auto Care, they're doing the alignment for me. Of course, by now I've got the springs in, I've got caster camber plates in. And, the young technician that did it took him, for 4 or 5 hours to get this done. He wasn't that versed, so they let me in the shop and I helped him. But this was the product at the end. Of course, I'm driving around on the base, and which one that is, you can figure it out. But that got me the stance that I was looking for. And, it's just been fun working on all of the suspension parts.